God has power even over death. God has power over the darkest, most difficult things in our lives. And God wants to bring His healing love and His light to the darkest, most painful areas of our hearts and our lives. To me, all the readings today reflect this truth, this reality. Usually this time of year, I'm out in Omaha participating in a program called the Institute of Priestly Formation. I'm a part of their adjunct staff. I've been involved in this program for almost 20 years. It's a summer program of spiritual growth for seminarians. Usually there's 175 seminarians that do this program, and they come from all over the country. And at the very beginning of their summer, they do an 8-day silent retreat. And so I'm one of the spiritual directors that serve that retreat. There's about 45 priests that come from all over the country to help with this program. And what's always amazing to me is that when these guys, these seminarians, give themselves over to these days of silent prayer, that what always happens is God brings up stuff in their lives, in their hearts, in their spirituality that utterly surprises them. Stuff that they thought they had already dealt with, stuff that they thought that God had kind of healed, comes bubbling up to the surface during those days of silence. And God does amazing things during this 8-day retreat. And then they kind of spend the rest of the summer trying to unpack what God did during that 8-day retreat. I was thinking about that program. Been praying about the guys who are going through that. I'm not there this summer, but almost every summer I'm out there. I hope to go next summer. I was thinking about that because we had some of our seminarians who were ordained deacons yesterday. A couple of weeks ago we had some men from our own parish who were ordained permanent deacons. Well, these were 5 seminarians who were ordained. They're called temporary deacons because they're going to be ordained priests next year. And I'll give you their names so that you can keep them in your prayers. Our seminarians need our prayers. Our priests need your prayers. They were Carlos da Silva, Francisco Arroyo, Cain Ramirez, Peter Nguyen, and Ruben Rivera. One of them was a Brazilian. One of them was born in Vietnam, is now an American. And 3 of them were from Mexico originally. So I was thinking about, as I was participating in that ordination ceremony, thinking about my own ordination to the diaconate, which actually took place here at St. Mary's. It was 25 years ago in March, down at the old church. And of course, as I was praying about, listening to that ordination, I was thinking about that. And, this week I celebrated my silver jubilee, my 25th anniversary of ordination to the priesthood. And I'm so grateful to so many of y'all for your expressions of love and support and kindness, for the gifts that I've received, for the hugs and the encouraging words. So grateful for those of you who were able to come Wednesday night and celebrate with me. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience for me to be here back in my home parish celebrating what began 25 years ago here at St. Mary's. Also, I want to be sure and introduce one of our seminarians who's going to be here for the summer with us, Gabe Bauk. It's one of our seminarians, and welcome, Gabe. We're happy to have you here. Gabe was here with us for Christmas, and he's going to be with us through the summer. So be nice to him, make him feel welcome. Invite him to your home for dinner. Gabe just finished his first year of seminary. I think a lot of people imagine that seminarians are kind of that people who are going to be ordained priests kind of come out of the womb aimed at the priesthood, and perfect little human beings just ready to be ordained or something. And even after 1 year of seminary, Gabe can assure you that that's not the truth. And after 25 years of priesthood, I can assure you also that that's not the truth. We, just like you, are a work in progress. There is stuff that God needs to transform in me even to this day. There's more areas of my heart and mind that I need to more fully surrender to God. To me, these readings speak about those ways that our lives get touched by darkness and pain that cripple us, that stunt our spiritual lives. I mean, all of us, if you think about it, all of us have things in us where, we do something and we kind of go, oh, why did I do that? Something happens and we suddenly lash out. Or we're in a situation where we know that we should do the right thing and we're just paralyzed to do it. Or we see in us this anger or this unforgiveness or this judgmentalism. We see in us this selfishness. Or maybe we see in us this kind of coldness in our heart towards the plight of others, a coldness in our heart towards spiritual things, towards God, a coldness in our heart when we come to Mass. It's just like, there's something that we don't like, but it's there. The sad thing is sometimes that darkness, we make friends with it, and that's very dangerous. These readings speak to us about those ways that those overwhelming tendencies in our lives can be conquered by God's love and God's grace. These two widows that we have in the readings, the first reading from Kings and then in the Gospel, both of them were in dire straits. The first one is the widow of Zarephath that Elijah was sent to. And I don't know if you know the story in that same chapter about when he first arrives there. The whole area, that whole land was in a drought. The people had been unfaithful to God. And so there was a drought throughout the land. And so God sends Elijah to this town that's outside the promised land, outside of Israel. And he even sends him to this widow. So in a way, both Elijah and this widow are in desperate straits. He goes to this most unlikely spot. So he's being called by God to a unique depth of trust. Remember what happened. He walks into the town and he sees this widow and he says, "Give me something to eat, please." He's dying of hunger. And she goes, "All I have is a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil, and I was about to make myself and my son a cake, and then we were going to eat it and die." And he says, "Well, God is going to take care of you if you will give me that cake." amazingly enough, she trusts Elijah and trusts God. And she gives him that cake. And then you know the story. God blessed her abundantly, and she had enough flour and oil to supply food for her and her son Elijah for another year after that. Then we hear the story about what happens with her son. And now she's raging against Elijah, and she's raging against God. And notice what she says. Did you come here to punish me for my sins? There's this wound in her life, this darkness in her life. And we don't know really what it's all about. But a lot of times we carry shame and guilt around with us. And it tends to cripple our spiritual life. You see that in St. Paul's passage today. You know, St. Paul never forgot how he lived and what he did before Christ changed him. St. Paul, he says, I persecuted the church. He said, I even tried to destroy the church. Think of the guilt and shame that he carried around with him because of that. I mean, he was putting Christians to death. Putting them in jail. And what does St. Paul say? What does he do? He said, God sent me out to Arabia. What that means is he was sent out to the desert. To that place where he could be alone with God. To that place where God could heal his soul. Now, you know, you may not have the opportunity to go spend 8 days in silent retreat. But you know, God can do amazing things in 1 hour in our adoration chapel. But we got to give God time and space to bring healing and to bring healing to our hearts and to bring light into our darkness. We see what Jesus does when he encounters this widow of Nain. You know, widows were in a desperate spot in the biblical days. They were dependent on their husbands, and so if they lost their husband, they were dependent on their husbands for their financial well-being and their security. And if they lost their husband, then they were dependent on their children, particularly their sons. And if they lost their son and they had no extended family, then they were reduced to begging in the village. So this widow Nain is coming out with her only son. She was a widow. And this was her only son. And what does the gospel tell us? Jesus' heart was moved with pity, with mercy. And you remember what Elijah did. Elijah cried out to God and kind of threw himself on the boy, and the boy was brought back to life. And what does Jesus do? He simply touches the coffin and says, "Arise." We see the power of Jesus, the power of God, to come into that desperate place, that place of darkness and pain and hurt, and bring healing, to bring his light, to bring his grace. Well, we ask the Lord today to come into those areas of our lives that we've not fully surrendered, those places maybe that we've buried, those places of darkness and pain. We ask the Lord to come in and bring his healing, to bring his conversion, to bring his light and his grace. It's not an easy thing to do. It really takes spiritual work to do that. And guess what? God is never going to force it on us. God waits for our permission, for our invitation. So I encourage you today and this week, invite the Lord into those areas of your heart and your souls and your lives that most need his healing touch. Allow him to bring conversion, to bring his light to those dark places, and to bring new life